Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're watching and listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. My guest today is my friend and colleague, Dan Armstrong. Thought I'd bring Dan back on to talk about a number of issues, tie a bunch of threads together, and come up with what we see as a sit rep and going forward, projections, short, intermediate, long term, that may be coming down the pike. So without any further ado, Dan, welcome back to the Cosmic Switchboard Show.
Thank you, James. Always a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Pleasure and honor is all ours. Well, buddy, tell me, tell me what's been going on over here. We've had, by our standards, something of a mini heat wave. We got the fan going on in the background. I know that maybe in the CONUS, continental U.S., it's getting hammered by cyclonic bombs, atmospheric rivers. The terms they come up with that explain all this weather weaponry. What's it like in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, last week we had our bomb cyclone that knocked out power, and it wasn't too bad where I'm living, but in some places, I mean, they didn't get it going up for 48, 72 hours. If you're living out in the sticks, it just seems to be like there's this general rule of thumb now. If you live out in the country, you're on your own.
Yeah. It's almost their way of just weeding out, culling those that are of a independent, standalone kind of mentality, right?
Completely. Oh, for sure. And I've seen in even the past few years since coming back here and living in different parts of the province, there's an attack on the rural communities. They are trying to shut them down. They are trying to get everyone to move into the cities. They're making the logistics difficult. The weather weaponry is targeting them during their tourist seasons, so that nobody comes, whether it's wildfires or somehow they're just doing road repairs along that one highway that takes people into town and tells people to not come out. The small towns, they're really squeezing them hard at this point, I felt.
Well, there's still people suffering desperately in the hills of North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, places like that. They still have had no relief whatsoever. When the Amish did come by and built small dwellings for the survivors, the feds came along and say, "Oh, these buildings are not in code. You got to get out. And they're not safe for you," right? Because they care so much about us. This is really a dystopian system. And before we started, I mentioned that although I try not to watch mainstream news, if I come across it, I just turn everything on its head to see what they're really trying to dissuade us from believing or knowing about. But it's gotten to the point now where I'm having a they live moment almost every time I come across these lamestream presenters, influencers of one sort or another. It's remarkable to see play out in front of you, Dan.
Yeah. And I find even when you're out in public, it's before we needed, when there was all the masks going on, you sort of saw like the compliant versus maybe the less compliant, and you could sort of have that measure, like see that difference in the people. But now I find when you just hear people talking, you can tell who's watching mainstream television versus who isn't, and who's probably getting their alternative media as their main news source. And it's amazing how contrasted they are from each other. Because I'll just see somebody here in Canada just going into a fit about Trump or something like that. Right? Like they get all worked up. They get into a state. And I'm always very surprised by that,
Yeah, I think it's
not
indicative.
Because I'm like all 100% in his camp or something, but just that they would invest so much of their energy into that and know so little about our own local issues and our own, that this is what bothers me the most. We have a real estate housing bubble here that is just crushing the population, crushing them. And and it's not being discussed. They're trying to say, oh, it's some immigrants and this and that. It's really about money laundering. It's a huge money laundering operation, the fentanyl money. Canada's recent the Canadian bank operating the state's TD recently got fined $3 billion for money laundering operations. $3 billion, and they know it's coming directly from Chinese PRC narcs, fentanyl washing, international students, housing bubble. It's all related. And that's, of course, the elephant in the room nobody discusses, because they talk to the population like they're a bunch of 5-year-olds talking to Santa Claus or something when they deal with these politicians.
Well, you mentioned a few things there, and there's a lot there to unpack. That just what you mentioned, the Chinese PRC infiltration into virtually all segments of society through their trading organizations, through their friendship committees with the West. They've installed so many people that are friendly to them, or they have either paid off, compromised in some way. So many MPs in the Western world, members of parliament, so many politicians at a local level, to the point where Gavin Newsom, Lizard Boy himself in California, he's got a horde of weapons and arsenals set aside for some unspecified purpose. Maybe they'll be headed over to the cartels. Maybe they'll be headed over to the Chinese. The situation is ripe for like a takeover inside and out. And even the way that the social media influencing works, companies like TikTok, which are Chinese owned, the ability that they have to influence individual and mob group behavior, thereby further destabilizing American society, American cohesiveness in our society.
Absolutely. I have a friend from China. He laughed years ago when it came to TikTok. He says, "You guys are so naive. They're using TikTok to analyze all your behavior. It's all being fed into their AI. They can, I mean, you thought Cambridge Analytica was a nightmare. Wait until you see what happens when the PRC has, really we're talking about a level of hacking of the very human condition itself, right? Because we're going down to the physiology, people's mannerisms, how they speak, the topics they speak about. All of this is just being sucked into these data centers, because obviously it's about full spectrum dominance, to put it in military terms, right? Full spectrum dominance. And so we have all these devices measuring everything on us, from our heart rate to our brain waves, and everything we do, and the geo tracking that goes on. People are very naive about that. And I mean, even here on the local level, I mean, a lot of our local businesses have all been bought up by overseas Chinese. So now our local shopping malls, a lot of our small businesses, people look at it, it's their big payday. They ran a small business for 30, 40 years. They come along, somebody wants to, I'm not saying everybody doing so is criminal, but I think when you are putting a very hefty sum into a business that's clearly not going to make you this money as a return, you are, laundering it in one way or another. We've had things too. I mean, just to not to just say this is random conjecture. I mean, even if you look at be careful, it's the first segment, but in Winnipeg, we had BioLevel 4 lab as well. And lo and behold, this is a big controversy that's hidden, even in the Truther Committee. Guess who they had working in the biolab? Oh, that's right. They had PRC lady. You know what they found? And they've done the investigations. They were shipping. They were mailing these viral samples straight to China without filling the necessary control documentation. Okay. So the level of sophistication of the narratives, the counter narratives, there's so many levels of deception with all of this, but it really comes back down to really looking at it as a coordinated system.
Yes.
This takes a lot of cooperation from the US authorities, from the Canadian authorities, all the levels of government, the banking sector, etc. This is not something you can pull off if anybody was actually looking out for their national interests.
This is true. And there's this notion amongst the truther community, so-called, that this close collaboration with China really only started with the Clinton Obama administrations, but the fact that the Chinese PRC has had their hip pockets in what we would now call rhinos, but in a lot of mainstream in the old days Republicans, preceding Iran-Contra and even preceding the looting of all the savings and loans, all the thrifts, all the credit unions, that was all intelligence related. The Bushes and their entire family of Bush brothers and sons were deeply involved in that. And the interaction with the Chinese, the PRC, was so deeply ingrained in the Republican Party that when you zoom out and you look at it now, well, they've got the Republicans in their pocket, they got certainly the Democrats in their pocket. There is no difference anymore, and it may be a difference in degree, not in kind, and it remains to be seen what the policy is going forward with China, because China has to be regarded as a major player. Their advances in rocketry and everything, and there's an irony to that.
Thanks in part to America.
Yes,
right? This is all reverse engineered tech. I mean, I don't know if you followed it, like that professor from the University of Michigan that was working in the aeronautics engineering department, and that he got fired over protesting, saying, why are we sending this kind of classified controlled information and I'm being forced to send it to the PRC?
Yes.
Like, there's forced technology transfer.
Yes.
It's very important to understand too. This isn't indigenous to China developed stuff necessarily. Even your trade agreements to be able to have your company work within China requires concessions of this type, right? And they say, well, you don't want to come agree to our principles, then you don't have to have access to our markets, which these companies can't afford anymore. But there's clearly this thing of they force technology transfer, and this is they've literally built China up. I don't know if you see, like, and not to say that it's just recent, like you said, but even if you look back to the great scandal in 2013, where they basically said the Chinese had basically copied the entire U.S. defense hardware system, the entire thing. I mean, and it was in the news for about a week. It went from, everything from THAAD and the missile, various forms of missile defense, everything. The F-35, well, they can keep that.
They can keep that.
Give them more F-35 plans. But it was in the news for a week, and they basically said, well, you know what? Well, maybe we just have to rebuild the whole U.S. infrastructure, like military infrastructure, from scratch now that they have it. So this is one of the ways that they've leapfrogged ahead in their development, is what I like to emphasize to people, to understand there's been this massive cooperation. Because either the Department of Defense and the NSA were really behind the ball and letting these hackers get this information, which is, of course, state-sponsored, intelligence units, or they to a certain degree let it happen because they needed a threatening enough adversary. And a China with 1960s level technology as a military could never catch up to the US. So they allowed it. The same thing as what's his name? Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and Anthony Sutton.
Anthony Sutton, yes.
When he describes like the forced technology transfer to the Soviet Union for the key machine parts that couldn't possibly be made there. Right?
National Suicide was a great book he wrote, the arming of the Soviet Union. They literally gave them the patents and the blueprints and even the hardware to develop a lot of this technology. That was running in parallel to like a large scale Soviet industrial espionage operation going back to the 1920s at least. And then you look at the sad case of Professor Qian Xuesen, who was a colleague of a protege of Dr. Theodore von Karman. I've talked about Dr. Theodore von Karman in the past as the head of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Air Force, deeply involved in majestic level analysis and back engineering of alien technology. I don't know if Professor Qian Xuesen was privy to that information. He did take part. He was in Jet Propulsion Lab. He was a close colleague of von Karman's. He was worked in Caltech, worked at MIT. At the highest levels, he wrote papers dealing with aerodynamics, compression, airflows, compression of fluids, et cetera, that were to this day still regarded as a premier in the field of rocketry, missile development, et cetera. So, in fact, he's written some of the papers. If you look up the Beyond the Horizons series of reports put out by the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board, Xuesen is one of the authors of a number of these very technical papers. So then he comes under suspicion.
Is he a Chinese American, Taiwanese,
well, he came
Chinese?
from mainland China in the 1930s, studied at MIT, then worked at Caltech. He got that Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory scholarship, and then he began working under Theodor von Karman. In fact, Qian did most of the mathematical computations for a lot of von Karman's work. And long story short, he comes here, or comes to America rather, and learns and advances the field of aeronautics and missile development. And then he comes under suspicion from the FBI, and then he's persecuted. They keep him kind of in cold storage for a number of years, not letting him leave the country, get him he was already an arrogant kind of guy to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So for him to lose face at that level from a Chinese perspective, regarded as a traitor by a country he was hoping to spend the rest of his life in, and to be a citizen, et cetera. No, after a cooling off period of a number of years, they sent him packing. If he was such a security threat, and I don't mean to sound callous or hardened about this, but they bumped off other people for far less, right?
Look at what they did to Assange.
Yes.
For what?
So eventually they let Qian go. Where else can he go? He goes back to mainland China and quickly becomes the father of modern Chinese rocketry and rocket and missile development. And all of the advancements today, the Chinese openly say, hypersonic missiles, we got that from Professor Qian. All these different advancements in missile development, long-range missiles, et cetera. The whole series of DF missiles, the aircraft killer missile, the Guam-based killer missile, all that was based on the work of Qian. And so, to follow your point you made, the know-how and the technology doesn't grow on trees. It's got to be developed somewhere. And so, what have they done? They've sent this guy back to China. I'm not saying they should have bumped him off, right?
No,
but he goes back, and predictably he goes and starts the Chinese Communist Missile Development Program, and here we are, hypersonic missiles, impossible to stop by normal conventional technology. The notion of sending the U.S.
just from a national security perspective, you would never have released that. It's far too significant, right?
It's far too significant, but they did, and now we have to deal with it now.
Right. And I was listening to a video yesterday, actually, by some World Bank guy, and he was talking about going to China in the early 2000s, some World Bank director. And he was just talking about the level of espionage and everything. And he was actually very, I'll be fair, very intelligent, understood some of the historical context of China, why the attitudes had changed, why there was this culture of immorality due to the Cultural Revolution, how Mao's Red Book got replaced with success. But he said, and it was really interesting. I love the comment section. Sometimes you learn more than the video, even from a comment section, because everybody brings in their personal stories. But it was very clear there's many people coming and saying, oh yeah, all of this tech transfer. They said, that all these Chinese academics in that were sent abroad. I mean, this was all weaponized. This isn't just friendly academic exchanges.
A lot of them worked in the national labs like Los Alamos and places. Iranian scientists had worked in the national labs in Los Alamos and Livermore and other places too.
Yeah. And, and they talked about it, and they, sort of say under their breath, yeah, we were there to steal the satellite technology. Like, they were sent out with specific missions when they went to these universities and that, right? And then, I mean, if you think that they're not hacking Western liberalism to their maximum advantage, You don't know much about Chinese or Asian
Yes,
people.
yes,
They are extremely practical people. I'm not saying that, we can transpose Western values and say that's bad, but these are people who are meant for survival. And
yes,
unfortunately, the Chinese people, instead of understanding their heritage as being Chinese, that one of the worst things that's ever happened is the PRC,
yes,
the and specifically the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has melded its idea of saying we are China.
yes,
If you're Chinese, you are CCP.
yes,
And so the CCP has done this great way of sort of taking over the whole Chinese identity. So nowadays, Chinese people, well, they're very proud, of course, of their culture, which they should be, but it's all being directed through the funnel of the PRC's public relations and strategic system,
yes.
right?
Yeah, it's communism with a Chinese face is how they call it. And
Yeah.
their notion that any Chinese anywhere, ethnic Chinese anywhere, it's called the diaspora, call it
Mm-hmm.
whatever
Mm-hmm.
one wants, they are all regarded as assets and working for the CCP. And they will even they'll do this for non-Chinese as well, but particularly for Chinese, they have a grading system essentially, where
Yep.
okay, one category he's with us, second category sympathetic can be turned, three hostile enemy, right? And they work accordingly. If there's a politician out there in the West somewhere who's talking badly about China, he's going to be, or she is going to be subject to a lot of abuse, harassment, trolling,
Absolutely.
in the way they can mobilize people, Chinese, to just suddenly pop up in front of an embassy or a consulate and protest, or the amount of abuse and vitriol they can heap onto someone on social media through their control of bots, through their control of trolls and activists. It's
Absolutely.
it's remarkable how they've managed to do it. And we're
And
gonna
now
go
and now they've
eventually.
also probably one of their friendlies in terms of their rating system are all these university students coming out of the college campuses,
Yes.
because they seem to be defenders. They're like, oh, capitalism's so bad. Not saying there isn't, I don't even, it's not really even capitalism.
Yeah.
But then they turn and they say, well, those Chinese aren't so bad. And why are you so close-minded? Maybe they're doing something right. So we have this ideological subversion that's happened at the same time. Um, there's, I found it's really interesting, even in the world of, say, I know it's sort of getting away from some of that politics, but it's about a culture war is what I'm wanting to highlight. That, I love a lot of architecture forums on Facebook, and that I follow these things, and you see all these. It's really interesting. In the old days, the way communist regimes would love to celebrate that they are modernizing is by, on the back of their money, print, some, big factory on the back or
Yeah.
something, or some
Or a
hydro dam,
tractor,
or
like a big tractor
right.
in the back. Yeah.
And now it's interesting. I noticed that all of these architectural showpieces they have, suddenly the Chinese are supposedly loving opera houses and theaters and libraries. But they're really just, they're not actually meant for the people to enjoy. They're just showpieces to say, look, we're sophisticated. Look, we're modern.
Cultured.
Look,
Yes.
take us seriously. Right.
Yeah.
And
And what I wonder about is the final stage from the Mao's perspective was the combat phase, right?
right.
So are we going to get there eventually? Because the U.S. military dangling on the puppet strings as it is the paper tiger. The notion that it could, even if China wanted to have a land invasion, amphibious invasion, probably maybe combined with a big airborne attack against Taiwan, rather than take it over by subterfuge or some way, which I'm sure they're working on that plan as well. Point being is that the notion of the U.S. fleet sallying out and going into the Straits of Taiwan and stopping, and that's a non-starter
Oh yeah.
because there's rings of defenses, uh, chains of islands. They don't have enough forward deployed troops. The American military doesn't. So what troops they have for deployed in bases are just going to come under a hailstorm of missile attacks and drone attacks. And if they try to deploy in, from CONUS to Westpac, Western Pacific, that's a long way.
Yeah. It's half a planet away.
It's half a planet away. So to deploy from the CONUS, large bodies of troops and troop transports on ships, that's also a non-starter. Because the ability
people's heads are still back in the Second World War, thinking we still have a theater that looks like this. And this is I guess this is the good point. With all of your expertise, you appreciate these innovations, and especially in the concepts of warfare. And so we're already started this hybrid war anyway, when we're talking about the infiltration into the governments. The trade relationships, like here in Canada, for example, I mean, they've just completely sold entire oil fields to them, right? And then what they're doing is now they're building the pipeline to send it to the Pacific. Well, why are they paying $40 billion for this pipeline that was supposed to be 12? Why did the federal government come in and do this? Well, because they need to send it to the Chinese. Yes. and they don't even use Canadian workers for these places. They will set up the whole base, the whole camp. They will just import the Chinese people.
They get a mass visa.
They somehow, it's like this it's like this extraterritorial jurisdiction within our own country to just literally take the resources out of it now and ship it back to China. It's insane. Yeah. But it's not discussed.
Yes.
Right? Because the former Canadian Prime Minister is too busy working for a big Chinese American law firm, using his contacts to help milk and game our system to help them take over our country. Right?
Yes. And the marrying up of the Chinese communist expansionist mentality, the ideological war, combined with high tech, their ability to shut down now, and they've gamed it out. A lot of Western war colleges have said there's going to be a massive, cyber attack. You're going to see communication satellites, navigation satellites falling out of the sky like dead fireflies, right? And if you go back to 1970s think tank papers, they were talking about, one kind of possible anti-satellite killer sent up a missile, then it explodes and showers the a satellite with hordes of BBs and renders the the solar panels ineffective. The battery runs down. Well, now the Chinese are moving their outdated, soon to expire satellites into the path of American, British, NSA satellites, bumping them off course, right? Yeah. That's been happening already. There was some kind of a satellite meltdown, if you remember, several weeks back. Oh, by the way, apparently these Chinese boats, and they have this whole fleet, not only PLA Navy, but this maritime militia of theirs that are going around causing problems for the Philippines and other places, ramming Philippine Coast Guard boats.
Well, did you see this thing this week about cutting the Baltic cable?
Yeah, cutting the Baltic
from Finland.
Cable. Cutting the Baltic
they're doing a thing where they're surrounding the ship, though. It's really interesting. Like, we're really looking at, I don't think people realize we are really at 11:59 on the clock here.
Because their attention is focused, rightly so, on Ukraine. There's supposedly a peace process in the works with Israel and Hezbollah. We'll see how long that lasts, right? Yeah. So their attention is focused on there. But if you look at the way that CCP has spread out and entrenched its tendrils throughout the West, it's that, to me, and the fact that so many military-aged Chinese males in particular, but also women who are loyal to the CCP and have that whole ideology, they're just all throughout society, but they've been coming up through the Mexican border for a long time. And now increasingly, as you pointed out, they're there. They basically taken over Canada. And when you mention extraterritoriality, it's interesting how the tables turn, because as you know, and for the benefit of the listeners and viewers who may not be familiar with this, as you know, the Western colonizers, Germany and America and Britain and other countries did was they had these extraterritorial enclaves, spheres of influence in mainland China, where it was their maritime Admiralty Law. They can arrest and punish Chinese citizens. They forced, trade wars and opium wars on the Chinese, right? So now the tables have turned. This extraterritoriality system has been re-imported back to the West. And yeah, and like I said, if we go into the combat phase, this paper tiger, because from an ideal perspective, right, and this almost harkens back, has echoes of the Terminator Matrix stories, which was stolen by that poor lady who, that paralegal in LA somewhere. She made the mistake of sending her scripts and her stories to Hollywood, and she never saw it again. But anyway, how the Skynet system,
right,
in order to take down the whole planet, it initiates this nuclear war between America and Russia. And I can't help but think about that, because what we're seeing is the powers that be, they want their cake and they want to eat it too. America and Russia, whatever anyone has to say, negative or otherwise, about Christianity, America and Russia are the two biggest Christian countries on the planet. So this notion, I don't think, and I don't know what your thoughts on this is. My feeling is, when people say, oh, well, Putin, they're all just part of it, it's all just a big act, I'm not so sure about that. Putin knows he's dealing with a bunch of irrational, illogical, even if he, for sake of argument, was part of some kind of agenda. He must know by now, at least, that these people that are pulling the strings, the Zionists pulling the strings in the West, are complete psychopathic whack jobs that might want to see it all go to hell in their lifetime, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
and it's a quick point. The dispensational apocalyptic mentality is, not only do they want to destroy Russia for all the perceived wrongs and what are the things they may have done in the past, right? Because this goes back to Ukraine being Khazar. It's a long-standing feud that a lot of these surface-level truthers aren't aware of, the enmity that these modern-day Bolsheviks have towards Russia and how much they want to destroy it. On the one hand, and they want to take down a long-standing goals, take down the new Atlantis. What better way than to keep poking Putin and the Russian bear in the eye until finally he says, okay, enough is enough. With their precision, they don't even need to use nuclear ordnance. They just proved this with the launch of the Areshnik missile, right? And everything just plays into the U.S. pulls out of the intermediate nuclear forces missile treaty 2019. Russians were probably already working with an intermediate range Areshnik anyway, right? But then once that happened, okay, balls in a wall. We're gonna
I think Russia looks at it simply as this. Russia has said, well, if we're the only ones that are going to do this, we'll appoint ourselves the hegemon to save civilization itself, because we see that your Western infection, this Anglo whatever it is, this NATO
decadent,
beyond
Roman decadence.
You know what I mean? We know all of that. And they know what it is, because they're not stupid. I'm sure that Russia understands exactly what NATO is. If you understand, NATO is related exactly to the Swiss. It's related to the people the Swiss financed in the Second World War. We know who we're talking about.
Yeah, the Bank of International Settlements. Yeah,
right. And we can see exactly who's fighting it, and I don't blame them. They're trying to save the very cultural fabric and their civilization from, becoming just this American corporate culture wasteland. And they're like, no, this is far too important. So whatever the motives are, I think they actually have a notion of nationality.
Yes.
Right. Because this is all about erasing nationality. If we look at it, and you know this, James, because you study war. I mean, you look at World War I, it was to break up the great empires, right? Your Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, etc. Right? Russian Empire, right? So that's the purpose of World War I. It's not about Archduke Ferdinand nonsense or whatever. And then you see, so each of these wars has a focus and a move towards global centralization has always been the goal. It's just these incremental steps of moving us one step closer. And ironically, they couldn't do it when you had these powerful empires. right? They need to break it down into nation states, and then we'll control the nation states through our intermediary. Like the whole European Union project was initiated by the Bank of International Settlements. So when you're not upset, when you don't like the EU, what you don't like is the secret cabal of bankers that designed the EU. So I see this when we're looking at for the things for what would be the next major international conflict. I can see it. It's taking out the vestiges of the nation state. And we'll move into what Justin Trudeau wants to boast, to make Canada the first post-national state. So we'll just erase all concepts of culture and identity from the state, and the state will just be this thing in the big pyramid.
Yeah, so and we're already seeing that there's been major inroads into eradicating the history of the white European heritage history, right? Wholesale elimination of actual history and replaced by this weird woke, just like that when you watch these Hunger Game movies, all these weird freak show types that are in positions of authority and power, all these irrational people they keep putting in front of us and make it seem all trendy and cool and something to be emulated, right? When really it just
I know
brings out all the monsters.
I had to argue about somebody talking, celebrating taking down statues the other day. Younger person, left-leaning, that's cool. I mean, no issues with that, but they really don't understand the issues. If they understood what the Cultural Revolution was and the ramifications of that, like even when we talk about China today, people don't realize, go to China. Well, maybe now because the CCP is like trying to do this revival of like they're the protectors of Chinese culture about face, but none of that's originals. Very little of it are original buildings and that. Like they destroyed everything. And that's why they don't have the moral system that Chinese culture once had, right? They eliminated all of that. And so when we see the level of devastation, that is the plan with the woke liberal agenda, right? Like it doesn't stop at taking down statues. It goes into, it's destroyed the fine art world. It's destroyed now our history. Now they're trying to inject and say things that aren't, they started with Netflix and these things, but putting in false characters. I'm watching a show about, Catherine the Great, but somehow there's courtiers that are of African descent.
Yeah, that's very common now. That's very common.
Right. And so what it's about, and it's not about, we're trying to be fair or open-minded. What it's about is trying to destroy the history. Most cultures would never tolerate this type of infiltration.
Yes.
And so this is what really worries me, is they're really winning the ideological war.
Yes.
And we could have, now I'm not saying everything about Western history was great. There's a lot of stains on people's hands, but I think that's exactly why we keep it the way it is. Yes. We need to learn from our mistakes. I say, keep the statues so you can explain to your children, that Christopher Columbus guy, do you know he used to do this and that and base it off of some fact, or maybe some, put a bit of information behind it. But when we take away our buildings, when we take away our art and all these things, we're taking away our memory. It's a memory reset.
Yes, it is. It is. It's not just that they're open disdain for whites and European heritage. It's like you pointed out, they're eradicating history, and exactly like they did in the Cultural Revolution in China.
That's right.
Right? Just eradicate the past. Before they had, in the old days, a competitive scholastic exam series where, these budding, hopeful, one-day civil servants, they had to take a series of exams in China.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the imperial exam system.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, they had to prove their worth. It was a meritocracy. But now that's all been changed. It's all based on ideological commitment nowadays. And to complete the point about Terminator, the Russians and Americans, the way the Terminator system did it was it caused America and Russia to nuke each other. Well, they want their cake and eat it too. They want to destroy Russia, but before they want to destroy, assimilate, break up into its constituent parts, ethnic divisions, etc. Before they do that, they want Russia to launch and destroy America and whatever is left, right? is ripe for the plucking. And the way they're shutting down the food, the Department of Agriculture still shutting down farmers, still slaughtering mass amounts of livestock, of chicken, of poultry, et cetera, things that are being set up for mass famine on top of everything else. And a quick point.
Why else do you think we were being trained to stand outside of grocery stores during the special period?
Just like it was in the old Soviet Union, where people would wait for hours in lines, and they finally get to the front.
You got to train the people in advance. You can't just suddenly throw it on, because you could have a chaotic element. So they've done. I've noticed that now is there's a whole new culture. We really aren't out of the woods about the special operation there. And let's face it, it was a military operation. It was
absolutely
nothing other
than nothing more. And again, there's that tie-in with Wuhan, tie-in with the Chinese, the University of North Carolina. And a quick point, in this first segment, I'd like your thoughts on it. And we got so much to get into in part two. But
I know,
now Elon Musk is being set up to be some kind of advisor to Trump's military, Pentagon, where there's this program that's going to be called, I forget what it's called, the algorithm or something. I have to do more research into it. But basically, the ostensible purpose for this AI program that either Musk is going to come up with or has already come up with is to streamline, optimize, the military, the procurement system, the requirements, but then how is that going to affect warfighting? How is that going to affect the decision-making process? They already have AI powered computers, computer-powered snipers in the IDF. Oh, look, there's a target of opportunity there, blam, but there's no one pulling the trigger. Well, they still got those psychos, snipers, of course they do. But increasingly, they're moving towards an AI platform, computer command and control sniper system. Okay, so that's like bringing it way down to the specific. Now scale it up. What else is this AI program that Musk is working on that's supposed to help and streamline the hopelessly bloated, hopelessly messed up Pentagon? That I'd like to see.
Yeah, well, it's simple. The Musk's new plan is all contracts go directly to him. He could funnel it out, right? As he lectures us on government efficiency, the person who received billions of dollars in grants for companies that would have never normally stood regular market conditions. The same person who wants your Neuralink and everything else. I agree. I think it's a huge thing to get into, but I was looking at, again, the linguistics of it the other day. AI forms in what's known in linguistics as a diphthong. It's two vowels are put together, and it makes a new sound, usually of a long sound variety. So if you put AI together, you have I. So you see, we have the all-seeing I, because the AI will have ubiquitous control over every single aspect in our digital infrastructure. This is what we are looking at, the great work that some people like to call it on the Luciferian side. The great work is coming about. And I think, this all goes back to, your ancient Egypt, Babylonia. It's the same system.
Yes. And now, jump-started by alien technology, jump-started by there are Luciferian, I want to get into this in the second segment, Luciferian demiurgic forces at work. And I think that people shouldn't lose sight of that the forces playing these hybridized minions here on the surface, these are non-human factors at work. And the sooner we can get to that level of understanding, the better. And, quick point before we finish this first segment, Luis Elizondo, right? He's the new poster boy, flavor of the month for UFO disclosure. The kind of statements he's saying, my labs is nonsense, underground bases are nonsense. What he doesn't know that the German V2 program in the Hertz Mountains, the Dora complex, was underground. He doesn't know that the British aircraft industry in World War II went underground because of the incessant German bombings, right?
Everything the Chinese built was underground or in mountains.
Yes.
Mao was completely paranoid of a nuclear strike by
Yes.
Nixon. So
Yes.
they have massive tunnel networks under
Massive
Chinese
tunnel
cities.
networks. And if he's supposed to be a big shot insider, he would know beneath the Pentagon. He had that Mickey Mouse Pentagon department, a budget of 22 million that wouldn't even pay for a tune-up for an F-22 or F-35, right?
Right.
So he's part of this Mickey Mouse department, and he claims to be some kind of expert, but he's not even aware that there's underground facilities in the Beltway. He's not the Crystal City. The Crystal City is that there's a shopping mall underneath there. So he says blanket statement, underground base is BS. Well, no, you're BS, Lewis.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is why people like me and people like you never took you seriously, because you're there, you're a shill, I hate the term controlled.
But you know what's amazing about these people, though? They're great because it's all about eyeballs, the attention economy. Yes. And people will watch those UAP hearings. It's like they got them by the millions, just, trying to analyze it word by word. Oh, what are they going to tell us? The secrets they're going to tell us on. And it's so absurd to me. And you're just completely wasting your time. You don't need validation from these people. You already know.
Look, I lived through the whitewashing of the Iran-Contra. You remember those endlessly boring hearings. They didn't talk about the massive fraud perpetrated in the insurance and banking industry. They didn't talk about the massive drug trafficking. It was just all a bunch of drivel and a bunch of nonsense, and all the players were protected, right? Yeah. So
and look at where Ollie North is now. He's doing great.
He's doing great. He's doing great.
I can't believe when I see that he still exists and he's like being interviewed on CNN and things, and I'm like,
he's a conservative. A conservative who believes in bringing hordes of cocaine and drugs and arms smuggling, and into America. Like, great job at national security there. So this is where we're at now. I always knew that there were going to be a new military or ex-military priesthood that will be the go-to guys for UFO disclosure, and we're seeing it now, right?
And trust me too, the PLA, the PRC, the Communist Party, they don't mind at all. You see, I realized this living there years ago. If the entire commercial system collapses, it's actually, who wins? Well, they just turn around, people like, oh, well, that would be a nightmare for China. No, it wouldn't be. Now the PLA has moral capital to go in and run the whole society. They'll just turn in and they'll be like, you know what, we're going to get rid of that corrupt Politburo and we'll step in. But they'll still be controlled by them behind the scenes.
Yes.
But they'll be able to have a whole new level of authoritarianism. And the military will probably do things. I mean, China's overbuilt housing by over 1.4 billion people.
You need to
right, so they can literally move all of India into China comfortably, and everyone would still be housed. So I see what they do is, you get all these kids in the military. Maybe they're just playing a video game version on the other end. It's not even the regular AI. Or
for some of them, it was a seamless transition. There were one moment they're playing, Call of Duty. The next, they're in a shack in the Nevada desert conducting drone strikes on weddings in Pakistan, right?
Right.
Or somehow they're Call of Duty nut, and somehow they pass selection and they're in special forces, right? So, and one last comment I want to make: in some of the podcasts that I watch or peruse, ex special forces types, they were going on and on about, if Trump unleashes, Delta Force, otherwise known as Combat Applications Group, another euphemism they come up with, if they turn loose the tier 1 units against the cartels, the cartels have no idea what's going to hit them. It's game over. Wait a minute. Just, you mean the cartels that are propped up by the CIA, Mossad, protected by the Drug Enforcement Administration? Those
given
cartels,
weapons by these very agencies.
Yes, that was what Fast and Furious and all the exporting of all these guns. They wind up in the hands of the bloody cartels who are in cahoots with the Chinese. Okay,
of course. Well, and this is we saw even with the border crisis. Don't want to open up a new thread here, but we were seeing that they're flying people into Mexico City. The cartel was controlling it once you got into Mexico City, that they would ship you to the border, and they were doing this for people from China. And they were and the cartels are making bank off of the smuggling of people across the border. It was highly organized.
Yes, it was.
They're making hundreds of millions of dollars from this.
That reached into the highest levels of Homeland Security. And Homeland Security controls all these federal agencies, right?
Right.
Delta Force has a symbiotic relationship with the FBI's HURT unit, hostage rescue team. Elements of Delta Force were there when those women and children were burnt up in Waco. Don't think we forgot about that, okay?
Right.
So point being is that, and also this silly notion, oh, the bikers, the Hells Angels, they're going to fight against the, the Tren Araga. It's like some of these biker organizations get their drugs from the cartels.
Right.
Right. They have this a symbiotic relationship. Oh, I can see how, just like in the bogus war on terror, I could see how these tier 1 operators go out, we're about this person, that. Well, we're fighting the cartels up. Why do you want us to kill this American guy? Let's see, he's a Christian conservative. Oh yeah, he works for the cartels. Oh, also he works for Hamas. Get rid of him. Okay, bang, bang, dead. That's what they do all over the world. What about this guy? He doesn't seem to be more than a goat herder. Oh no, he's a high value target. Take him out. Bang, bang, he's dead.
Yeah.
And then there are Delta operators and others around the world saying, no, we went around killing all. Yeah, I'm sure they took out some really evil people, and I'm glad they did. But they never got to the root of the matter. They never did. Right. And so this notion that
you would ruin the whole business model if you did that.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's too many people making bank. It's the same thing like I said about the money laundering. Everybody's making bank, so they turn a blind eye to this.
Everyone's making money. I mean, the long established intelligence criminal underworld symbiosis going back clear back to the days of when Shang was a warlord in China. He was running his own trafficking operations where the feds, were turning a blind eye to back then, right? Yeah. So, you fast forward, you look at Iran-Contra, all the drug trafficking, all the big players, intelligence-related guys, Santo Trafficante, all those guys. And to suddenly
the French connection, it's not just Americans. I mean, people don't realize the French Indochina War was about drugs.
It was about drugs.
The Vietnam War was a continuation of the French Indochina War, which is why it shouldn't be a surprise.
It shouldn't be a surprise. CIA and military intelligence basically took over the French rackets, or at least co-opted some of it, along with the criminal organizations and the Corsicans in Marseille, French intelligence, the CIA. So this notion that Delta is going to take down these cartels, that's a non-starter. The notion that bikers who are reliant upon the drug trade are going to go out and take down Tren Aragua. It's just
the drug trade, human trafficking, and everything else. They somehow have this morality that it's like, because they do a toy drive now and then, that they're the good guys. It's great.
Well, we reached the end of the first segment with old buddy Dan Armstrong. And Dan, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Sure. Well, I am on Facebook. I prefer, rather than the friend request, just a message on there to me. Also, my email is great, Mr. Mr. Daniel Armstrong 2 @gmail.com. I'm trying to get that website going up, but I just have a hard time with those templates. So reach out to me there. I'm always happy to meet new people.
And Dan is a brilliant guy, as you've seen. And to our dear listeners and viewers, if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next segment.